I'm going to talk briefly about using the GrowthPath application server to manage the Deer cache and the connection to Zoho Analytics. Both are managed from the GrowthPath application server, which is a per client server, so you'll have your own login to that. Just a little bit of background. Before the data ends up in Zoho Analytics, it starts in Deer, of course, an invoice or a shipment or something that causes a transaction. But first it goes into the Deer cache, which is stored on the GrowthPath application server. And that's a copy of the data from the Deer API. In other words, they're basically so-called JSON documents summarizing the order, for example. And that updates on a certain schedule, typically once every 2 hours, although it's often updated on demand. So it's not a live copy of Deer data. It's not very out of date, but it's definitely not live. And then the Zoho connector processes this data. So the advantage of the Zoho connector processing this data is that this logic can access the data in a database on the server. So it's much faster, and I can do much more sophisticated data processing to prepare data to go onto the Zoho Analytics platform. If the Zoho connector was talking directly to Deer, it would be very, very intense in terms of the load on the Deer API, and it would be impossible to do a lot of the advanced processing that I do with this approach. The Deer cache is used for the GrowthPath integrations, so it's used multiple times, so it really does provide a huge speed up for the integration work that we do. And it can also be considered a primitive form of a backup of Deer. And then we have the Zoho connector. So the data goes here first, and then the Zoho connector also is a job which runs on a schedule to push updated data into Zoho Analytics. So I've logged on to testdeer.growthpath.com.au. You would have your own version of this. This is the URL which accesses your deployment of the GrowthPath application server. And you'll have a login. So you log in. Now you notice in that previous screen, there was also the option to log in with Xero. Your user account on the GrowthPath application server has an email address. And if the email address is the same as the email address you used to log on to Xero, you can log on with that one-click log on with Xero option. So the number of tiles you see here depends on which applications have been deployed on your copy of the GrowthPath application server. In this particular case, we see two. We see one tile for the Deer cache and one tile for the connector. So the total flow of data from Deer before it gets to Analytics means it goes through the cache and then it gets processed by the connector. The cache updates quite frequently, typically every 2 hours. But if you did want to refresh the Deer cache manually, you go into the Deer tile and you click Deer cache management and you click refresh or rebuild the Deer cache. And the default settings are basically fine. If you were in a great rush and you only wanted to update sales data, you could deselect these and click sales only, or likewise for purchases. But I'm going to hit run and we'll see what it does. So it's pulling in the latest data from Deer, and that's finished. If you have multiple Deer instances, it would repeat this process for all the Deer instances you had connected to the server. So that was quite fast. Now the Deer cache is up to date. Now that was very fast because in this test environment, there are very few transactions that happen from day to day. It's only if someone's been doing some testing that we get any updated information. There are some other options on that screen. For instance, you can force it to go back a certain period in history, and you can force it to reload every single document. So refresh with fast scan has a quick check to see if there's evidence that the document is out of date. For instance, the last modified date is different, or some other key fields are different. There is a small, like a very, very small chance that there might be an update in DIA which is not detected with this fast scan technique. It should almost never happen, but it is a theoretical possibility. In that case, the refresh with reload will just update every document. It does it on a rolling basis, so it doesn't delete documents first, it just updates them. So while you might be running this slow refresh with reload, it won't just won't invalidate all the data in the cache. It just goes through it, processing one document at a time. Most of the time, refresh with fast scan is the right method to change. It's actually very fast, so you can go back a long way in history and it won't take very long. All right, so now to get back to the tiles, we click on the logo here, and now we can look at updating Zoho Analytics. So there's a similar looking form in which it asks you which data do you want to refresh. Once again, the default settings are typically what you would use. And it goes through here. Now, some data sources in the Analytics connector have to be refreshed completely. For example, product availability. If you ask for it to update product availability, it has to update the entire availability information for all the products. It can't do a partial update. So this will take a couple of minutes. Simply, even if there's no transactional data, it will still take a couple of minutes because of some of the steps do take a long time to do. Now, in this mode, the standard mode, it only updates a small number of rows at the same time. That's because to preserve data integrity, when it realizes that, for instance, a sales order has changed, it first deletes all data associated with that sales order and then puts the new data in. That means while this process is running, there is disturbance in the data. There'll be some records deleted and a few seconds later updated. To try and minimize that disturbance, it works in fairly small batches at a time, which does slow it down. Okay, it's nearly finished. This counts the number of seconds elapsed in the job, so that took a little bit more than 2 minutes. How often should you update Zoho Analytics? So there will be a schedule set where it updates fairly often. Let's have a look here. So click on the admin screen and we have a look at periodic tasks, and we can see the refresh Zoho Analytics. This is the main one. This means at 1 minute past every second hour it updates. That's actually a very, very high refresh rate for a business analytics tool. Most business analytics tools update once a day or maybe twice a day. So this is quite an efficient code base, and it can cope with updates every 2 hours, which is quite remarkable. It's certainly not designed to update every minute. Okay, so it's not a tool which is designed to have a live view of data. It's a tool which is designed to have a near live view of data. However, if you really, really do need to refresh the data, now you know what steps to follow to make sure you've got the latest data in Zoho. Now, there's something else I'll show you. I've logged on to the Zoho Analytics test environment, which matches the test GrowthPath application server that we're working on. I've clicked on tables and I've asked for tables with the name update in them, and there's only one here, table update status. So this table is updated by the Zoho connector update process. So while an update is in process, it will have a comment updating, okay? And when it's finished, it says updated, and it gives you a timestamp of the last time it was updated. So if another user wants to find out if someone else is updating Zoho, you can open up the table update status and have a look at this table and see if there's an update in progress. Because of the way the connector is designed, the regular update process minimizes the disturbance during an update. So now I've changed back to my application server. This other menu here, integrity check, is designed. This runs automatically a few times a day. I think every 8 hours, and it will detect problems in the data. For example, duplicate master data, or uh, a mismatch between the deer cache and the analytics data. Now that mismatch can be expected if the cache is being updated, say 10 minutes ago, and the Zoho Analytics update process hasn't run yet. So you should expect this to report some differences. There are some sales which are not in Zoho Analytics and which should be. Those sort of things will be picked up the next time the connector refreshes. It also checks whether the inventory movements table reflects agrees with the data in the cache. It does a few other checks. You can always run that manually if you have some concerns about the data integrity in Zoho Analytics. When it finds errors, it's either fixes them right away or manipulates the cache so the next time the update process is run, the incorrect documents are forced into being refreshed in analytics. So you can have a look at that and see what kind of errors it does detect. In this particular case, we can see here that it's found that no SKUs with incorrect product movement data. And normally I would expect to see some missing sales orders and purchase orders simply because of the timing issue of the caches not being updated at the same time. In this particular case, it hasn't found any documents which are mismatched, and it hasn't found any duplicates either. But there's no harm in running that and just getting a feel for what the data integrity situation is. Now, I did flick over to the admin section briefly to have a look at the cron tab, the scheduled jobs and the timing of them. I'm an admin user, so I get to see all the tables. The number of users, the number of tables that you might get to see depends on what privileges you've been given, and it's possible to set up users so that they don't see anything at all. What we have in here is, for example, we have access to the deer cache itself. So if I click on that and filter by orders, I can see the JSON returned for that order from the Deer API. So there are orders, purchase orders, and various other information, pieces of information cached in here. There's also a table which has the log output for the jobs. So sometimes if there's an error, you might want to investigate the logs and see if they provide any advice. Normally this is something that I look at, but you can look at it as well if you're trying to hunt down a particular problem. The periodic tasks, I mentioned them before briefly. If I take a periodic task, so let's look at this one here, the Zoho Analytics Integrity Check and Repair. This is the schedule. It uses a Unix or Linux scheduling tool called crontab. And you can see there's a clue here. The first value is the minute, then the hour, then the day of the month, and the month of the year, and so on. You'll often see a minute provided. So in this case, it runs at 31 minutes past the hour. And the next field, which is */8, specifies the hour. If there was simply a number there, like 8, it would mean run it at 800 hours in UTC time. When it's in the format */8, it means run it every 8 hours or 3 times a day. So if I find one that runs here, so this is a job which runs every 15 minutes. So in the minute field, we have */15, and then I have stars for all the other fields. A star in, for example, the hour field means run it every hour. Star in the day field means this would run every day. In other words, this cron tab means every 15 minutes do this job. And here's one that runs at 1 minute past the hour every second hour. Here's one that runs once a day, 16 minutes past the hour at 1800 hours UTC, GMT, run this particular job. So that's the periodic tasks. If you change the schedule, it will be overwritten next time the server restarts. So if there's a job where you want to change the schedule, at the moment you have to ask me to put that into the code base, otherwise your changes will be overwritten. Right, so that's a tour of the two main features of the GrowthPath application server, the Dear Cache and the analytics connector.